regarding the illegal registration of Kenyans as members of political parties. That was last month. And of course, during that period, of course, the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties came out to say that Kenyans would have to write directly to her to, of course, withdraw their membership status from, of course, political parties which had registered them illegally. This, of course, is according to the Registrar of Political Parties, that is Anne Nderitu, who maintained that it is the custodian of data and had only availed the integrated political parties management system to members of the public to check their party status. My colleague Kevin Mutai, of course, comes to us with this story from 2 weeks ago.
Of the Registrar of Political Parties is currently carrying out an audit of its online platform identified as the Integrated Political Parties Management System. The system, which is linked to eCitizen, was designed to enable citizens to check their party membership status online. This comes a few days after Kenyans erupted on social media to protest the discovery that they've been registered in political parties without their consent, raising questions concerning the safety of personal data in the country.
We wanted to get the kind of feedback we got. And I would say that to us, from an institution point of view, it was a successful exercise. Very successful, because we are able to get feedback. And we are documenting that feedback from all over.
The Registrar of Political Parties also says that the aggrieved Kenyans will now have to officially resign from the said parties before the final register is forwarded to the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. There are 73 registered political parties in the country, with over 1,000 applications in the process.
You object to the party because data belongs to the party, but copy us. When you copy us, we are supposed to act. When the party does not act in the framework that we have given them, then we are supposed to act and remove you from that membership list if you are in the wrong party.
According to a survey conducted by the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, Kenya lost about 18 billion shillings to cybercrimes in 2016. A study conducted by Communications Authority also shows that a majority of threats are malware attacks, followed by web application attacks.
Most of the times you find government officers and also other, private entities, they share quite confidential information. And we are saying we are in the era where data is actually very important. It is the one that is going to make us more competitive or not competitive.
We expect that people appreciate the role of information security management framework in enhancing the security of information across all domains of our socioeconomic and security development.
There are fears of increased cybercrimes during the upcoming general elections. Kevin Mutai, NTV in Mombasa.
My colleague Kevin Mutai, of course, with that story from 2 weeks ago that we are rerunning regarding, of course, today's conversation on data protection. And let's get you started with that conversation this morning. We are talking about data privacy and, of course, efforts to step up data protection in Kenya. And my guest this morning in studio, Mugambi Laibuta, is a privacy and data protection specialist. Good morning, Mugambi, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Kiprop.
Asante.
Thank you. Asante.
All right, and April Oishoi, she's the CEO of Infosphere. She also joins us in studio this morning. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right, and joining us virtually this morning is my colleague, Faustin Gila. He's a journalist with the Nation Media Group, specifically the Daily Nation. Good morning, Faustin, and welcome to the show. Please unmute your mic, Faustin.
Yeah. Good morning, Victor, and thank you for welcoming to the show.
All right, Karibu Sana. Maybe we can start with that story we've just played, the issue of the illegal registration of Kenyans into political parties. So some of us have never affiliated ourselves with any political party in the country, and then you wake up and this morning you're told, hey, you know what? You're a member, a bona fide one, of Jubilee Party.
Yes.
Mugambi, what's going on?
It shows a breakdown. It's a breakdown of how personal data, there are two things. There are issues to do with the political party system, the Political Parties Act, the Registrar of Political Parties, and then on the other hand, we have matters data protection. The Data Protection Act and the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner and regulation of personal data in Kenya. Now, on the issue of registration, we have the Constitution that is very clear that on political rights, all of us have that, every person has that right to either join or get out of a party, establish a party, and that is the prerogative. It's not compulsory, right? Just the way like voting is not compulsory. Then of course, under the Political Parties Act, there are certain structures that a political parties must fulfill. For example, the political party to be registered must have members in at least more than half of the counties. It should provide a register to indicate that it really has those members, the signatures, etc. And this is what is presented to the Registrar of Political Parties under the Political Parties Act. So what the registrar is meant to do is to confirm whether that list, those are the actually bona fide members of these political parties. But now what we saw is a situation whereby I have never been a member of any political party.
At all?
Then there's this portal, I check, then I'm a member of a certain political party. So that one violates my political rights because it is through free will that I either engage in political processes or not.
Yeah.
Then now there's the other aspect is, where did these political parties get my data? Because you see, you need my name, you need my ID to register me.
My passport mobile number.
Yes, my mobile, for example, maybe my email to register me to a political party. That shows this political party that registered me to their party got this personal data from somewhere. So the question is, where did they get this data? So one, the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties is supposed to carry out an audit of this party list. So there's one question, and I think she said that they're carrying out an audit. So to what extent did they carry out an audit? Then secondly, we have the Data Protection Act that has been in place since November 2019. So the question is, my personal data has been used. Again, I did not consent for my personal data to be used to register a political party. So there's already a breach of the Data Protection Act. So then my question comes, this is a massive breach because it's not one or two. You know, there's a difference if it's one or two people. These are many people. I mean, looking at the conversation online, they go to thousands and thousands of people.
I actually found out I'm a member of something called the ANC party. I think it should be Mani National Congress.
Yeah, Mani National Congress. So then we get this statement by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which I thought was a very timid statement and soft statement. Because when you look at countries where massive breach of data has occurred, the data protection regulator comes hitting hard. One, it should hit hard at the political parties. Where did these political parties get this data? At the same time, the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties should be telling these parties, we will deregister you because we are seeing that your party lists are not in order. So in my view, at that point, that is what the Office of Registrar of Political Parties should have done. Then the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner should have given show cause notices to these political parties as to why she should not take administrative action against them for using personal data of Kenyans to register them to political parties.
So you think the response was not firm enough?
I think the response was weak, plainly. The response by the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties and the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner were not sufficient in recognition of the kind of massive breach that occurred.
All right, let me just bring in Faustin. Faustin, you're definitely a journalist, my colleague at the Nation Media Group, and you followed this story very closely. Maybe I can ask you, first of all, did you find yourself registered to any political party that you had not consented to?
Okay, myself, when I checked my name on that party's portal, I didn't find my name there. Yeah. So I think it starts from the personal level. For example, everybody now owns a phone, because the question is, at what point was your ID number, exact names and a telephone number, when were they given out without your consent? When did political parties get this information? When and how? Who sold your data to them? So that is the biggest question, and I think it should start from a personal level, even before we go to the political parties or the Office of the Data Protection. Personally, when you are browsing over the internet, so many times, so many of us have accepted cookies, and they have also allowed third-party apps on their smartphones to extract data with their consent, although this is unknowingly. So this is the biggest issue that we have from a personal level, even before we think about our Huduma data being shared across political parties.
Okay.
So myself, I've turned off all third parties from accessing my personal data. I've also been very careful with cookies on websites on my laptop. Mm-hmm. So there is no point where any political party or company can access my private data, and that's why I think I was not a member of any political party. Okay. But so many of my colleagues were members.
And maybe we'll actually come back to the issue of what you can do, the need for digital literacy. But something else I noticed, April, was you were registered without your consent or knowledge. But when it comes to the issue of the registration, you're now being told about some cumbersome process involving, I don't know, writing to the registrar of political parties, copying, I don't know which office, and then it will take how many, some really cumbersome, needless process, which does not come with the fluidity that we saw when I was being registered.
Okay, first of all, there are two things here. You were registered without your knowledge and without your consent. And if you are supposed to, any data controller, which is, in this case is a political party, any data controller who is actually taking your data, if they have not collected it from you personally, should actually come out and tell you where they have collected this data from. That is in the Data Protection Act of 2019. So the first thing in this situation should be, they should actually tell us. And I think this is a situation of empowerment of the citizen, because the Data Protection Act, the objective of that act is to give data control back to the data subject, who is me, who is the citizen, who was registered in this case. So why is it that they the registrar of parties are asking you to go through this whole cumbersome process, yet you are supposed to opt in? Okay. Am I right, Mugambi? Yeah. You're supposed to opt in. You are supposed to issue a conscious consent that, you know what, I am accepting to be a part of this list that you have collected and to be a part of this political party. And I
totally understand your point, because I mean, it should be optional. I should decide which party, not to wake up and decide someone has already made the decision for me that, you know what, Victor Kiprop, you're a bona fide member of this party. In fact, you are not registered today. You have been a member for 4 years.
Yes, and you've never known.
Mugambi, let me ask you, can I sue them? Can I sue Amani National Congress?
Of course. There are certain processes. I mean, as I said, there are two things. There is the right to privacy and there are the political party rights. Now, being registered to a political party against your will is against the provision, I think is Article 37, if I'm not wrong, of the Constitution, political party rights. So that is already a breach of that. Being registered to a political party against your will. So that can be a constitutional question. I mean, is this a breach of my political rights? Then secondly, there's the right to privacy and Article 31 of the Constitution. That my data has been used in a manner, I think Apriel has mentioned it, in a way that I did not consent to. I think your colleague, sorry, I forgot his name, was talked about.
Faustin, yes.
Faustin, yes. Yeah. Faustin talked about cookies and all this. But there are a lot of sources of data that is abused in this country. One, we have what we call data brokers. We have individuals, companies that all they do is collect data from different sources. They collect data from those books that we sign, getting into an estate, getting into a building, establishment, etc. At some point, they are getting it from mobile money registers. Some of these individuals go to hospitals and get the registration sheets of hospitals. They go to academic institutions, especially of higher learning where people are over 18, and they get records. Statutory institutions that carry out social work, it's been seen that their databases are out there being sold. So there are a lot of sources, even for people, for someone who's never been online, there are sources where your personal data can be collected, packaged, and sold. The challenge, and now in that regard, the Data Protection Act provides for certain safeguards. For example, one could complain to the political party directly, what the registrar is saying. Give or take, the registrar is somehow right. Yeah. But then you see this is a massive breach. How many complaints could you... This needs to be solved within a grander scheme of things. So yes, you make a complaint to the political party. If the political party doesn't act on the political acts processes, you go to the registrar of political parties. Then on the issue of data protection, you can make a complaint to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. But there's also a question whether these offices do have the capacity to handle these complaints, because there are many complaints. And if you're not happy, for example, by the decision of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, the Act allows you to appeal to the High Court. But the point that I wish to emphasize more is the capacity of these institutions to handle these complaints, because there are many complaints. For example, in the next financial year, you'll be surprised that the allocation, the budgetary allocation from the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner is 50 million shillings. Ask yourself, 50 million shillings for a regulator that we all need, that we want. Is it even enough to pay salaries?
And I actually have to put it on the record that we tried to get the Data Protection Commissioner, that is Immaculate Kasai, to come on the show. And part of the response we got from the office was it's still being set up. It's not yet very much funded, and they're struggling with staffing. Much of the people she relies on are being seconded from the Ministry of ICT, so I think definitely is in tandem with what you're talking about.
Yes, I mean, 50 million. Let me give, there's one anecdote I like giving to demonstrate this. We had the Cambridge Analytica problem in 2017. The ICO, the Information Commission Office of the UK, that is the data regulator, used more than $3 million just to investigate Cambridge Analytica. It was that big.
And I like that you bring the issue of Cambridge Analytica, because that was massive in 2017.
Correct.
We saw them in Kenya, we saw them in Argentina, we saw them in Nigeria, and we saw them in the United States.
In Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, so the question is, do we really want an independent? Because in my view, I think we need to empower this office. It needs resources. 50 million shillings allocation, because if this office now has to depend on charity, if a regulator depends on charity, those people giving this office charity, when they need to be regulated, you look at the conflict of interest that arises.
Okay, and now that you mentioned Cambridge Analytica, I can't help but remember that in the next probably 12 months, we should be going for elections. And you could almost doubt the coincidence between this issue coming up exactly a year before we go to elections.
Yeah, correct. That's true. It's interesting that people are finding themselves registered, and we are talking about elections now. And during the last elections, some people were not even in the register. Some people could not even vote. So I'm seeing an issue of, there's a clash here. So some people are being registered into parties without their knowledge. But when it comes to the time to actually cast their constitutional right as a vote, people are not found even in these registers. So what happens? So that speaks a lot to how Kenya as a nation perceives or looks at data privacy. And that's a thing, because look at every institution, whatever institution you can think of. If it is a bank, they actually run on personal data. If it's a hospital, they actually run on personal data. So in 2020, the number of records that were actually breached as a result of personal data were 36 million. 36 billion, sorry, 36 billion, 36 billion across the world. Because if we look at the other, which is the other system, which is the equivalent of the Huduma number in Kenya, the system was hacked. And 1 billion records in India only were exposed. And that brings us to the question that you had asked earlier. So digital identity is definitely a good thing. Because once you are on the cyberspace, which every conference I have spoken at since 2018 has been talking about digital transformation, digital transformation. Everything is about digital transformation. Let's digitize, let's digitalize. Okay, fine. But when it comes to the issues of cybersecurity and data protection, they take a backseat. No one is talking about them. So
no one is looking at that side at all.
Let's get into the cyberspace. Everyone, let's go onto the cyberspace. Now look at this. The number of people who actually have access to internet across the world is 4.6 billion. How many people are we in the world? 7.5 billion. That's half. So potentially your threat landscape that we are looking at is half the world. So you can be attacked from anywhere across the world. So that is the threat landscape we're looking at. And someone said, okay, the percentage of people who are younger is actually more. But look at it this way. When I was growing up, I first accessed a computer when I was maybe around 16. The kids now, that was in high school, the kids now, by the age of 4, 5, 6, they are already handling phones. By the time they are 8, 9, 10, they're already learning how to code and how to do all this stuff. So you want to tell me Yahoo was hacked. many years back, maybe 10 to 15 years back, and who hacked Yahoo? A 15-year-old boy. And he was just hacking for fun. Now, if we look at the threat landscape now, we are looking at threat actors who are funded by governments. Now that we are talking about elections and voting and all that stuff, funded by governments. We can see Russia trying to get information from America,
and you can almost feel helpless as a small country. Like
exactly. So where does that place us? So if we are, and I think the power goes back to the citizen, and I'll keep saying this, the citizen needs to, the citizenry needs to know what their data protection rights are.
Yeah.
Because once we know, then we can push the Office of the Data Commissioner, much as we can actually push for the funding of this office. Because if, like, say, for example, all these people who found their names in the register without them actually giving consent, if everyone lodged a complaint to the Office of the Data Commissioner, what would happen, Mugambi?
And maybe Mugambi, now that she has raised this point, because if you remember the issue of Cambridge Analytica, it brings a whole new perspective of what you would call data-driven campaigning. And if you look at what's happening in Kiambaa right now, the campaigns are still maybe door-to-door. But when we go to the big league, the presidential league and gubernatorial league, you start seeing now the issues of Cambridge Analytica coming in and people being targeted with specific advertisements. So if you are politician A, let's say fan or something, or someone who would probably vote for politician A, politician B would employ certain tactics to target you with certain advertisements that would influence the way you are going to vote in the election. And some of them can be really dirty. Mugambi.
Let me go back to history a bit. The Data Protection Act has been was in discussion since around 2009. The first time I interacted with the Data Protection Bill was around 2011, and this was like a bill, and this was being promoted by civil society. Then coming the European General Data Protection Regulation conversations really heightened the debate, and what April is talking about, the issue of these breaches, seeing what the large multinational social media companies, the kind of massive extraction of data they were doing. So there's all this talk. But in Kenya, at some point we had two bills. We had a bill at Senate, we had a bill by the ICT being championed by the National Assembly. So political and economic interest have always, as she said, we are talking about digital transformation, but then when the conversation of cybersecurity and data protection and privacy comes, everybody's like, no, let's not talk about that.
Let's look at the other side, come on.
Then, if it was not for the Huduma number petition in the High Court challenging Huduma number,
we will, another thing
we will never have had the Data Protection Act, because the petitioners in the Huduma number case, one of the pillars of their petition and prayers to the court is that Kenya should not implement a digital ID so long as we don't have a comprehensive data protection law. So I think in that
we put the cart before the horse.
So yes, so I'm getting there. So when we are doing this, the government realized, let's give it to them. Then when you look at this act, people say it looks like the GDPR. Far from it. One of the core components, and as we speak about political party processes, what you've asked, is that in other jurisdictions, for example, the European General Data Protection Regulations, the South African Protection of Personal Information Act, political opinion is sensitive data. That was removed from our act. It doesn't appear from our act. And I think that was deliberate and conscious, so that these issues of the micro-targeting of political messaging being registered to a political party without a will could easily be done.
What would it have meant if it was left?
If we had that provision of sensitive data, it means it requires a higher level of protection. The same way it says, like, for example, fingerprint, it will have the same level of protection as your fingerprints, as your eye prints, all this kind, as your DNA, all that. You remember in the Huduma number, the court said you can implement Huduma, but don't collect GPS and DNA or biometric, and don't collect DNA. So political party views, if political opinions formed part of the definition of sensitive data, this really will not be happening. And if there were petitions to court, the court will have, the regulator, the Office of the Data Protection Commission and the courts will have required a higher level of protection. So that is why we will see these political targeted messages, because you see what they do, they get thousands of data points, and from that they can know this Laibuta chaps come from this area, so potentially his thinking is like this.
This type of a tribe.
Yeah, that's why in 2017 we will see some people, let's say on Facebook, are getting certain videos and certain messages on their on their feed. Others are not. Yeah. So it creates an echo chamber whereby you see in a constitutional democracy should be an exchange of an idea, but this abuse of personal data creates echo chambers. Incitement. That's why you see, like in America, in the last US elections, they are able to get radicals, whether on the right or on the left, and incite them against each other. Yeah. Because they are receiving different messaging that is curated from their data points.
And maybe something else we don't mention so much about the messaging is not just, you're not just receiving a message. You're also receiving a message that might not be true, isn't it, April?
That is true. Fake news became the thing during elections across everywhere where Cambridge Analytica was operating. Fake news was the modus operandi. Basically, you know, your perception of something actually influences how you work. So this is, I think this is very abusive because they are playing on your psychology. Because why would you actually try to influence my decision to come to a position where I do not wish to? And we are seeing a lot of that. Your colleague, Faustin, talked about these organizations that are just harvesting data online without your consent. I will actually speak to that. So last night I decided to do, just to go away from that, because I do this sometimes for knowledge and for fun. So I decided to do an initial assessment as a data commissioner auditor, if I was in that position. Yes. Of the financial institutions in Kenya. So I just looked at the banks. So I went to their websites. Of course, there are many banks. Kenya has about how many registered banks? About 58, almost 60.
50 something, yes.
Yeah, 50 something. So my research was actually on more than half of that, because that's a good number to actually qualify as a research. So I went online and I started looking at the data privacy statements. Mugambi, have you tried? Please go and look. I tried to look at the data privacy statements by these banks. I tried to look, you know, if you go to a site or a web application for companies in the US, companies in Europe, the first thing that will come up when you're actually doing this search is you'll get a notice on the cookies that are being used. And then right below that, you'll find the privacy statement. Read the privacy statement. The Kenyan banks, okay, first and foremost, privacy statements, those that had were shaky. Yeah. First and foremost, do not meet the requirements of the Data Protection Act. I will not even speak about the GDPR, which has been talking about, which is so much more stringent. I won't talk about that, but you know, in reality, we actually should. Because these banks and other organizations actually process European Union citizens' data, American citizens' data. These people have accounts with people who are from those countries. So as long as you are processing information from of a citizen from any of those countries, you should actually comply with that regulation. So I actually did a search, and let me tell you, the results were disappointing. Most of these banks are actually using tracking, and this tracking can actually track your information across domains, which means that they have a complete...
Every website you visit,
every website that you visit. So if I leave this website and go to the next website and go to the next website, basically there's a digital footprint of everywhere I'm accessing.
And that means if I were to visit a website today about, let's say, a website selling cars, most likely the next day I would find an advert from my bank offering me a car loan.
Exactly, because they're all interlinked. And now you see, they're not even giving you the cookie statement for you to opt in. Mugambi, you're supposed to opt in. When you are using targeted advertising, I am supposed to opt in to tell you, okay, fine, you know what? I accept that I want to be targeted.
And maybe if I bring in Faustin, then, for many of us, if you hear cookie, it's the cookies that are sold in the supermarket. We only see them accept all cookies to read them. What does it even mean?
A cookie is a piece of software that actually collects certain aspects of information on your browsing experience. So some of them actually collect information on your browsing experience, and some are actually used for authorization and to grant you access and to maintain your session when you are accessing a website somewhere. So imagine all these cookies are collecting all this information, and I actually was looking for specific types of cookies. I will not mention them here, but I was looking for specific types of cookies that actually work together. So they, first of all, another thing, automated processing. You are supposed to be notified that we are doing automated processing on your data. So all these bank sites, I actually went to their forms to see what types of data they're collecting. A lot of personal that contact us. First name, last name, phone number, ID, blah, blah, blah. That's personal data, right? They are supposed to notify me that they are collecting my data, and I'm supposed to give consent. Before they start collecting my data. So every bank that, let me say 98% of the 30-something plus banks I looked at, if I was doing an audit from the Office of the Data Commissioner, would be getting a fine within the next few weeks.
But that will not happen as Mugambi has highlighted. But Faustin, you actually, for the longest time, have had a problem with how most institutions and organizations do their terms and conditions. Most of the time it's copy-pasted. Most of the time it's using technical language sort of to make sure that you either don't understand or even don't bother to read.
Yeah, exactly. That is what they're doing. And first, from the cookie point of view, you find that they are only giving you an option to accept. If you click on cookies, you either accept or you click on preferences. So there is no option to click do not accept. You are not given a chance. It's so ruthless. You are not given a chance to deny access to your data, you see? And again, when you even go in to read the terms and conditions, you find that they are too long, and you know the Kenyan culture, we don't like reading. They are too long for the Kenyan online user to read all of them. And then, like she's saying, with banks, you find that these terms are just the same. They have copy-pasted, and again, they don't, it's like they are picking them from websites in Europe because of GDPR. But again, if you look at our data protection law, if you follow what they have written down there, it is actually meant to breach your data. Yes, it's as simple as that. And there is nothing done with this. And even when you look at Cambridge Analytica, last year I think Sunday Nation did an investigation into Cambridge Analytica, and we found out that it's still in Kenya, and it's hiding behind these cookies and data collection points, where they are on social media, they are on apps, they are everywhere, even in the physical and traditional collection of data, like what Mugambi said in M-Pesa registration and withdrawals, things like that. So it's happening, and it's happening like organized crime. You find that it's like these people know each other very well. And when you look at our law again, you find that even if a listed company is found to be breaching Kenyans' data, how much is the fine? The fine is very little compared to GDPR. The fine is 5 million. GDPR is 2 billion for the same. So it's something that is very serious, and action needs to be taken right now for what happened across the country on political parties collecting Kenyans' data. Because we don't know if action is not taken now, when they will do it again, and because we are heading to the electioneering period, they can do it again in December or in April, and because action has not been taken, they'll be very confident to go ahead to process data and do what we are calling psychological manipulation of voters ahead of the elections.
Let me just take this quick question that we have from one of our viewers regarding this conversation, if we can get that question ready now. And this is by Stanley Hiram Mugo. Says, if a stolen phone cannot be recovered in Kenya, what other methods would one use to secure data transmitted in the same mediums? That's Stanley Hiram. I think maybe that could be yours if you want to respond, April.
Well, nowadays, the organizations that are actually offering you services, let's say like Microsoft and all that stuff, Google, actually have a mechanism where you can trace your phone, first and foremost, or you can lock your data, essentially. So basically, there are mechanisms you can use to actually encrypt your phone such that even if it's stolen, your information will not go to the wrong people. If it cannot be tracked, if it cannot be accessed, the only other option that I know that I can think of is that you can, if you register to actually track your phone or to store your data or store your data in the cloud, because these are options that are coming with these phones nowadays. So you have Google, you have what is the Microsoft one called? Microsoft 365. You can actually you can actually store your information on all these cloud platforms. So that way you can retrieve your information. When it comes to your data, when it comes to your...
Erasing the data in the phone?
No, to your images and all that stuff. Unfortunately, I have found that you have to actually have the phone for you to be able to extract that information. So some information you can be able to extract, some information you will not be able to extract. But that's why it's important that you actually use encryption mechanisms such that people cannot get access to your phone, or you store your important data on the cloud such that you can actually retrieve it from wherever. The problem with that is, if you are logged onto Gmail or Office 365 or something, and the phone is stolen and you're still logged on at the time, that person will still be able to access your data until the time you activate and say that, you know what, my phone is lost. Then that sync stops happening. So until that time, people are still able to access your information.
Mugambi, let's revisit what is in the Act, by the way, which is actually meant to protect us. And part of, because she's mentioned something about cloud, and part of what I read, at least on that Act, was an issue of making sure, at least, that the data servers that host your, or at least a copy of it, is stored in Kenya. And that reminds me of the ghosts of the IEBC and the servers that were in somewhere, I think in France, or is it Germany, and all that.
That, Kipro, that brings, it's a conversation on what we call data localization or data residency. Basically what these two concepts mean is that a country, what we call data sovereignty, a country can decide and say any personal data being processed within that country must be stored, must be housed within that country. You cannot store that. So even if it's a cloud service, that cloud service must be within Kenya. Now, the provision that deals with cloud services, it says it is the Cabinet Secretary for ICT who is to determine whether there are services where personal data is to be hosted in Kenya. From the draft data protection regulations that were issued a few months ago, I think it's around 3 months ago, the proposal by the ICT Cabinet Secretary is that certain key services, for example, elections data, statutory institutions, academic institutions must have their servers, must have a copy. I think the word was must have a copy. But Kiprop, this brings me to another contentious issue relating to the Data Protection Act. We have two centers of power. We have the Cabinet Secretary in charge of ICT, and we have the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. You mentioned it, that when you contacted the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, they said that they are working with staff from the Ministry of ICT. Now, in an ideal situation, actually data protection authorities around the world that work, the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner is fully independent. Ours, on determining the departments of the office, you have to consult the ICT Cabinet Secretary. On coming up with regulations, it is the Cabinet Secretary for ICT to do it. On annual reports and budgeting, Cabinet Secretary for ICT. So this waters down the independence of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. Because on the issue that you're talking about on the server, look at this way, the Cabinet Secretary is determining whether you should store your personal data in Kenya or not. Then the authority that is supposed to see whether data protection principles are in operation is the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. You are creating two centers of power to regulate the same thing. But I do accept, yes, there's certain personal data that, of course, must be stored in country. And this is a political question. Actually, this is always a political question. When you look at a country like Russia, it's because of their their problems that they have with the US, for example. China, the same issue. So they decide that all their data should be there. But then also, it should make business sense. My clients who are financial institutions don't want to use a cloud system in Kenya. Also, other cloud services in Kenya to speak about that have the capacity. Of course, they are there, but do they have capacity to deal with all these sectors? They do not. So we have to be very careful how we craft that provision. One, of course, the data subjects' rights, our right to privacy is at the top. Yeah. Then also there is official public data from government for government systems that will make sense to have a local server or a copy here. But then for businesses, let us not make it hard for people to operate businesses within Kenya. Yes.
And I'll come back to the issue of businesses after this break, because really we are in the age of digitalization. We're trying to move businesses online. Some of them are really small SMEs. So how do they handle this whole issue of data? Part of the law requires that you may need to appoint a data protection officer. Can an SME hire a data protection officer? Don't go too far, because, of course, Mugambi Laibuta, April Ochoy, and, of course, Faustin Gila, my guests for this conversation on data protection, are staying with me. We go for a quick commercial break, but when we come back, we talk about those sneaky texts that you receive every morning. Who shares your data? Which company is the one that you transacted with? Is it a restaurant that you transacted with before they shared your data with a betting company? We talk about all that and what needs to be done, even on a personal level, to protect ourselves, of course, from being hacked or data infringement. Don't go too far.
Season is here thanks to Notify Mall. Shop from hundreds of online shops at our mega malls along Moi Avenue in Nairobi and Moi Avenue in Mombasa. Notify Mall, all your favorite online brands under one roof.
Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can open an account and lipa pole pole at your convenience? Did you know at Ruiru Mabati Factory, you can get customized sizes according to your roof plan to avoid wastage? Did you know Ruiru Mabati Factory offers free delivery countrywide within 72 hours? Call us now on 0111 050 700. Ruiru Mabati Factory, mali safi kwa bei poa.
Jammed up there by Allen, finds Cam Johnson, cutting, and a Cam slam. Where did that come from?
Paul against Randall, crossover, pull back, spin, throws it up in the basket. Oh, it goes in.
He's almost like, don't even run a play for me. Just give me the ball.
Behind the back delivery to D.A., give him the dime.
Knocking down that long tray there.
Oh, look at this. Dropping the sledgehammer. Count it, fouled on the play.
Seeing those shooting struggles, especially early on in career, what steps did you try and take? His CP3.
Each one more pushes. Jay Crowder throws it up for 8. Oh, what a connection there. And the foul.
Book works across the baseline, gets a switch, pulling Gobert out. On the step back from the corner, raising up, cash it in from the corner.
Paul step back three-pointer, puts it in, and the foul. Chance for a 4-point play.
Suns, Booker for the win, yes! But 1.5 on the clock.
Crowder looking, throws it alley-oop. Oh! Ayton puts it down! He puts it down!
Lifestyle Heights, a prestigious gated community in a tranquil environment offering elegantly styled 2 or 3 and a 3-bedroom plus a DSQ apartment, combining tasteful design and modern amenities. Contact us on 0706 155 277 or 0726 205 208.
Thank you for staying with your World on NTV this morning. We are talking about data protection and data privacy in Kenya. Of course, my guests this morning are still with me. Mugambila Ibuta is a privacy and data protection specialist. So is April Oichoi. She's the CEO of Infosphere, as well as my colleague Faustin Gila is a journalist with the Nation Media Group. Good people, let me just start here. I'm looking at my messaging app and I'm seeing 3 different betting applications that have been sending me messages over the last 3 days. I have tried to block 1 million of them, but these things just keep coming up. The mobile network provider says if you dial this and that, they will stop coming, but they just don't stop coming. But even before we talk about why they don't stop, the question is, where did they get my number? Maybe I can start with you, Faustin.
I think there are so many areas, levels where these companies can get your number. I understand that you have never placed a bet on any of the websites, but I don't know how your settings for your phone look like, but I understand there are other apps that still have access to every detail that you have, including passwords. And I mean, on your phone, there is somewhere on privacy settings, and although this is only available in a few phones, not all smartphones, where you need to disable apps that are accessing your data. And the key data that is collected is the calls that you make, all call logs, all messages that you send, and then on WhatsApp, you know that WhatsApp is connected to Instagram and Facebook because they are one company. Then we have Twitter, and you also have the password for your various accounts on other platforms where you use for news, things like that. So there are so many areas where your phone number can be retrieved without your consent, and then this is sold unknowingly to marketing companies, and the marketing companies now sell to these companies that are doing betting.
Let me just read another message, Faustin, if you'll allow me. This is from my colleague Benson here, and he received a message from someone, I won't mention the name, but this person said they are a netpreneur, an online business coach, network marketer, and they just wanted to engage him on a business opportunity, I think, and they were asking if he's a university or college student. So this guy asked him, where did you get my number? And she said, I got the contact from a digital database manager system under the 3 biggest telco companies in Kenya. And of course, he goes ahead to mention Telkom, Safaricom, and Airtel. And I can't help but think that there are just so many of companies that hold our data, from even the buildings that we enter and we leave our mobile phones and the IDs, from the supermarket where you transact, from the petrol station where you pay for your fuel. Literally every place you are in, you're leaving your data footprint. April.
Yes. Now that you touch on that, let me pick up from where he left, the cyberspace aspect, then I come to the physical space aspect that you have talked about. So on the cyberspace aspect, we have this problem with third-party applications. Now humans, naturally, we will go for functionality over security.
Okay.
Definitely. Naturally, even companies.
What does it mean to go for functionality over security?
I need this thing.
The efficiency that comes with mobile banking.
Exactly. I need the efficiency. I need the comfort. At the click of a button, I can receive anything. So if it means that for me to refuse them to get access to my personal data, I will not get access to this service, then I will compromise my security. That's just a thing, and we need to really think about that, because if you cannot be told what's on sale, the product is you. You are the product. And the fact of the matter is that your data is the biggest product that you have on the cyberspace. It is. So when you look at all these applications, you have sources of data, how the applications are built, web applications and mobile applications. You have data sources, and you have data sinks. Now, a lot of people, even tech people, do not understand, because tech is very diverse. You have application developers, you have cybersecurity, you have all that stuff. Network, etc. Even us in the tech field, some of us do not really understand what are the data sources are and what the data sinks are, unless you actually go back to the application and study the source code to understand that, okay, we are picking the data from here. There's API integrations at this point, and these are the third application these are the third application companies where my data is being fed. Now, those third application companies all store their data in different places. So how do you trace your piece of data? You have just accepted one application. This application is working with other third parties to basically move your data across the internet.
And if I can hold you on that one before you proceed, then there's also, because most of these apps really, I mean, if you asked me why my taxi hailing company needs my contacts, it would make, maybe it might make some sense. Because you look at some really useless apps on the phone, a torchlight, for instance, the one you use to light your room.
Why does it need to access your contact list or your messages? That's absolutely ridiculous. And that goes against the principles of data collection, I mean data protection. Because data minimization is a thing, and it is real. Why are you collecting more data about me than you need? Now onto the physical space. Last week I walked into Transnational House, and I'm going to say it here because I was very upset. So I was told, look into that screen, your temperature is going to be taken. I looked into the screen and my image was taken. And I asked, where the hell? So first of all, I was so confused. So I looked back again, and it flashed again. And I asked the Askari there, okay, so did that thing just take
my picture?
My picture. No. I'm like, no. Did that thing just take my picture? And she kept quiet. And I was so angry. I was so angry about that. I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm told, why do you need to get certain types of technology that you are saying you're taking someone's temperature? Why does it need to take an image of my face?
Because if we need to contact you, we have taken down your number and we've taken down your temperature. In case of anything, we can still call you.
Exactly. Now, right after that, I was supposed to go write in my name, leave my ID, and everything. So how many synthetic identities of people do we have on the cyberspace?
So in 1 second, in one transaction to enter a building, they already have your picture, they have your name,
they
your
have
ID number, and your phone number. They can literally do anything.
Exactly. Other buildings even go to the extent of getting your laptop serial number, your number plate, the person who you're going to see. Now, how many relationships can be gathered or can be built from just one incident, one instance of me walking into a building? And that's another thing that I think the data commissioner should act on fast.
And
this
maybe
business of collecting people's data at entry points in buildings is just ridiculous. I always ask, every time I enter into a building, where is this book going to?
But we'd argue that, you know what, we're trying, in case of a security, in case of a fire, we can account for the people in the building.
I have had all those arguments. My question usually simply is, where does this book go after you finish collecting this? I want to know, where does it go? And first of all, you are collecting my information. Is this information necessary in case of a fire? What in that whole list of things I have said, what do they need to contact me, or to contact my next of kin, or to identify me? Do they need to collect all that information? No, they don't. So we actually need to start living out the Data Protection Act. And citizens, and that's why I keep saying it has to go back to the citizens, and maybe even the civil societies. They have to come in to say, okay, you know what? Some of these regulations are in place to help the data subject, but right now they are not working because, first of all, the data subject does not understand the power they have over the data. The Act basically gives control back to the data subject, and that's what it's meant to be. And it's also supposed to be there. Well, it's not there in the Kenya Data Privacy Act, but in all the other acts, the reason for having a Data data protection regulation is to facilitate trade and to facilitate movement of information in a secure fashion. That's what we forget, in a secure fashion. So you will only facilitate, Kenya can only compete on a global scale if we are looking at digitalization together with security and privacy. We cannot look at it separately. So if we hope to compete, these are some of the things in terms of infrastructure that we have to put in place.
And allow Mugambi to respond on the legal side, because the law is here.
Now, on this issue of commercial use of data, it takes me back. Actually, it made me open the Data Protection Act itself. And Section 37, it takes a person shall not use for commercial purposes personal data obtained pursuant to provisions of this act unless the person has sought and obtained express consent from the data subject.
Okay.
So consent. And consent should be prior, free, and informed.
Exactly.
No coercion. And Faustina talked about it. People are gathering you talked about cookies, you're gathering all this information everywhere without the consent.
What does consent mean? Does it mean that before I share, assume I have your mobile number now, and I wanted to share it with, maybe the person who delivers food for us, I must call you and ask you for consent before I share?
This is how it works. Let's say I'm using a taxi hailing. You gave the example. You're using a taxi hailing application. Of course, they need your name and your phone number for you to call the taxi, then for you to make some payments. All right? Your personal data, your name and phone number, should only be used for the purpose of hailing that taxi and confirmation that you've paid.
That's it.
If that hailing taxi now starts sending you messages to a betting, I don't know, bet for who, they have other services, they should have received consent from you. That could we also use your data to market to you other products that we have. And this is why this is important. Because we have, I think Faustin mentioned, the data brokers. Because data brokers now gather all this information. They harvest this information, then they sell it to marketing companies, they sell it to governments. Actually, governments are buying personal data in the black market.
Yes.
Governments.
That's true.
Are buying personal data
in the black market. Shocked.
Yes, and it's a fact. The US is, I mean, it's something that you just Google, you will see it. Then it says, the another thing is that if you are to use data for commercial purposes, it must be either anonymized. It says a data controller and data processor that uses personal data for commercial purposes shall, where possible, anonymize the data in such a manner to ensure the data subject is no longer identifiable. This is problematic for my clients who are businesses. If somebody has given consent, if you are anonymizing the data, then how do we use it for commercial purposes?
That's actually just...
You see that it doesn't make sense. If somebody has given consent and now this act says that you must anonymize, it means my client who is in marketing or my client who is in trading or whatever, then how do you, if you anonymize the data about me, then you cannot send me the messages that I consented to. So a problem. Then lastly, it says the Cabinet Secretary in consultation with the Commissioner may prescribe guidelines for commercial use of data. Again, a problem. Why do we have this ICT Cabinet Secretary being mentioned in this act? And that they are the ones to, and it is not, it says may, the Cabinet will, in consultation, may prescribe practice guidelines, not even regulation. So that, it takes us back to that pillar and that historical problems of commercial entities and political entities being opposed to a data protection, a firm data protection regulation.
Now that you mentioned government, it means even the ministry falls under those people who should be sort of regulated or even monitored by the Data Protection Commissioner.
That is correct.
That is correct.
Let me just bring in Faustin at this point, because there was this research by World Wide Works, and I think Faustin dealt with this very well. And part of the finding was only 36% of Kenyan companies are aware of data privacy laws governing their businesses, the business processes, despite the Data Protection Act being in place since 2019. Now, another finding said that of the 352 that were surveyed, 58% said they allow third-party trackers on their website. Mostly for sharing content on social media, 64%, tracking affiliate relationships, and of course advertisement campaigns. And because of that, most of them actually rely on this to make profit. And when they were asked if they know it's wrong, they said they know, but they're not willing to let go. Let me just allow Faustin to highlight on that briefly.
That is so true.
Faustin, please unmute.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember doing that story, and those were shocking statistics to me personally, because I was awed by the fact that companies know that using data without consent is illegal.
Yes.
But again, they are trying to defend themselves by saying that if they don't do this, then they'll be out of business and they won't make profits. That's very disgusting, and I think from the user level and even businesses and large corporations, we need digital literacy, because most customers whose data is used don't know that it has been used to make money. You see, most data that is sold, nobody knows that this data has been sold and to how many companies this data has been sold. And if that is the new way of doing things, then we are in a very dangerous place where every data about us is being monetized and helping companies to make billions when you are left without anything, you see?
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it's time for companies and business leaders to respect this law and look for consent every time they want to use this data.
Okay.
And as Mugambi said, these must be anonymized. You don't have to identify everybody that has bought your product around, and then you want to use that to make money.
Okay, let me just bring in Mugambi at this point, because I mean, I take note of the fact that you use the word that they should learn to respect. I mean, we're not pleading with them. That's why we have this act from 2019. It should be able to be enforceable and put stiff penalties to ensure that everyone actually, toes the line.
I think Faustin and April mentioned the issue, and I think you also mentioned the need for public education on this thing. Takes us back to the resources that the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner has. Surely, you give this office 50 million shillings for a whole financial year. Are they going to pay salaries? Are they going to pay rent? Are they going to carry out public education? This office requires money. For example, I'll give an example. In Europe, the GDPR, it took 2 years. There was a grace period of 2 years for people to comply. In those 2 years, regulators were educating the public about what the GDPR is all about. It was educating institutions, both in public and private sector, what they need, what April talked about, the institutional data protection policies, the privacy notices. You are being told if you're in this sector and you use data for commercial purposes, this is what you need to do to comply. And we're giving you this period of time to put your house in order, So there's that gap, because this public education is important, because people handling data is all over the country. It doesn't matter whether you're in Lamu, whether you're in Nairobi, whether you're in Meru, whether you're in Kisumu. There are companies, institutions that are handling personal data. So that report that says that, I think you say 36%?
Yes, 36% were aware.
That is very low. That's a very low threshold. Secondly, when we look at how, of course, we're in a pandemic with a pandemic situation, and we had draft regulations on data protection. Those draft regulations were posted on our website. The public participation sessions were on Zoom, a digital platform. Look at it. How many Kenyans have access, for example, to Zoom, to internet, to engage in this public participation forum? The public discussions on these draft regulations ought to have gone mpaka mashinani. You see, where people also who do not have these gadgets or this access to, I mean, people have access to internet, but not constant internet with this bandwidth that can, for this amount of time. So what I think, in my view, we should have had these draft regulations. We should have a period within which to give people time to understand What is the Data Protection Act? What is the right to privacy and Article 31 of the Constitution? Empower the Data Protection Commissioner with resources to go up to the lowest level to tell people, hey, Article 31 gives you right to privacy. The Data Protection Act provides for this. These are your rights under Section 26 of the Data Protection Rights. Under Part 4 of the Data Protection Act, if you are a data controller or data processor, these are our obligations. If you have a complaint, this is how you file the complaint. This is the complaint process. These are the possible administrative actions that the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner should do. So that by the time that grace period is over, and what Faustin talked about, these people know that it's wrong. It's that at the end of the grace period now you have no option but to comply, because the public is educated. You are given time to comply by, for example, having an in-house data protection policy, appointing a data or a data protection officer, ensuring your systems comply with data protection principles like data minimization, data security, storage limitation, and all that kind of thing, dealing with issues of consent. Because now what will happen, once the regulations are in place, these regulations are heavy about revenue raising for the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. Because if you are registering, you must pay. If you are carrying a data protection impact assessment, you must pay. If you require an audit, you must pay. So the regulation, I think, they have given this important office such little money and told this office, now you look for your money by finding these people, by registering these people, that kind of, and that is not how a regulator that is dealing with a fundamental right and freedom should operate.
Okay, and of course that reminds me then of that this very same office should be dealing with giants in terms of companies like Facebook and Google and Twitter, which have even frustrated the entire United States government. So with Google and the Facebook and the Twitters of this world.
You see, that will be, if there's a petition, that will just be the legal fees of the lawyers in that petition. But you see, I know people say we are not Europe, but the example of the European Data Protection Regulation is very important and it's very key. It provides a lesson for us. It's stated as the gold standard. Even the US are saying we have no option but to comply with it, because the EU combined is the biggest market. It's the biggest digital market in the world combined. I mean, if you combine the whole of it. And they have done things that really, for example, finding these and they're not only finding multinationals, even everyone. Dental offices, a small dental office with one dentist and one dental technologist who have misused personal data are also fined. They fine institutions for not having an in-house data protection policy. They fine institutions for not having appointed a data protection officer. They fine institutions for having what we call dark patterns, where I think April talked about it, where you have algorithms that you don't understand and they're just collecting.
And making decisions.
And making decisions out of what she talked about, automated processing. So if you have a strong regulator, a well-funded regulator, if you have educated the public, if you have made the Data Protection Authority independent and funded it, then it is possible to have some baby step towards compliance, but not the kind of confused system that we have at the moment. But don't get me wrong, it is a good step that we already have a Data Protection Act for the discussion to commence. But as that discussion progresses, we have to also point out the problems and the issues. The fact that we needed to delete the ICT Cabinet Secretary from that act. We need to fund this, we need to sufficiently fund this office. This office should not be relying on development partner funds. It should a regulator that is fully funded and a regulator that can regulate everyone. For example, it was realized, for example, in the US, there's one civil liberties union that preaches a lot about personal data, etc. Regulators found it's selling personal data. So if this civil liberties organization was collaborating with the Data Protection Commissioner, how then does the Data Protection Commissioner take action against
this very same civil
There's
society?
no independence, basically. And just to add on to what he's saying, first of all, the fine that is attached to breaches, I personally found it ridiculously low. Because you're talking about tech giants, you're talking about big companies here, you're talking about companies like Safaricom. You're finding Safaricom 5 million for a breach.
They can do with it. That's fine with them.
They can do with it. I mean, really. So I personally felt like that it was targeting small and medium enterprises because those are the people who will suffer paying a fine of 5 million. Yeah. But there are people who make 5 million per second. Even in this country, per minute, there are organizations that make that amount of money. Yeah. So, and another thing that I have seen that happens in the West is when a company suffers a breach, they are actually mandated to report it. It's actually an enforced thing. And this is what the Data Protection Act is trying to do. But as Mugambi has said, right now, in the position they are in, with the type of funding they have, they are more or less like a toothless dog that is actually trying to start biting, you know. And they are not in the capacity, they do not have the capacity to actually come with the punch that they are supposed to punch. And that's why you'll find in situations like the one that we have just talked about, where people are being registered in political parties and they have no clue, at this point in time, surely, what would we expect the data commissioner to do? Her office is not even fully functional at this point. It has taken about six months. Her office came into whatever. Around 8 months. Yes, around 8 months. So I think I'll still go back to empowering the public because we are the push that will actually make some certain things happen.
Okay. And of course, when you talk about empowering the public, I can only remember the issue of Huduma number. We'll touch on that briefly after this break. But before we do that break, let's get to see what some of you have been saying on social media. Remember, we asked you our question of the day. Have you ever received promotional messages from a company you had never shared your contact with? Let's get to see what some of you have been saying. And Hydra says several times, and it is very irritating. Thank you, Hydra. Yes, we have Masai Girl who says yes, especially from betting companies. I think Masai Girl and myself are in the same box, suffering the predicament of betting companies. ZP Matoke, she says yes, severally. Where do they get my contacts? That is the question we are all trying to answer. Thank you, ZP, for your feedback. And Messi Kenneth says almost every day, and I guess that reinforces the point of stopping these messages, but they keep coming. Prince Noah says mostly from gambling sites and thieves. Thank you, Prince. And Baba Chasima says almost 4 times a week, and the way they get my contact, I have failed to understand. Thank you, Baba Chasima. And Pruto finally says severally, especially these lotteries and betting companies. And I think we're just all in agreement that indeed the problem is much more heavier on the side of betting and gambling companies and other marketing companies who harvest your data and use it for marketing purposes. We have to go for a quick break, but Mugambi, April, and of course Faustin are staying with me. When we come back, we'll talk about the possibility of actually being safe when you're online. We are in the age of digitalization. So can we move with perhaps the 4th industrial revolution, as Faustin would call it, and still be safe? Don't go too far.
Get yourself an aerial decoder plus 1 month free classic bouquet at only 999 Kenya shillings, or a satellite dish decoder plus 30 days free smart bouquet at 2,699 Kenya shillings.
What do you think about Molfix?
Actually, another brand was recommended to me, but it had a leakage problem. Then I decided to try Molfix. His clothes don't get wet anymore.
Because Molfix provides extra protection against leakage thanks to its anti-leakage elastic barriers.
All babies deserve a high-quality diaper. You should also try Molfix.
Kids are creative. They can really dazzle with words, and the people around them love the way they write. That is why at Sawa Soap, we are giving all class 6 and 7 kids in all public and private primary schools in Kenya a chance to dazzle Kenya with words in the Sawa Creative Writing Competition. Just write a creative 200 to 300 word essay titled Colors in Life and share it with your English class teacher. The best essays in each county shall be rewarded with goodies from Sawa Soap, and the best 5 essays in Kenya will get a 3-day fully paid trip to Mombasa, lots of goodies from Sawa Soap, and have their essays featured nationally.
Because I know voice about, jokes about, all my guys, they want to not tired. Oh, yeah, no, because I know voice about, jokes about, all my guys, they want to not tired.
To get Boys Are Bad by Keys Daniel, dial *812*802#. Skiza, Nan Nation.
Peterson Nyakundi, a Kenyan teacher who moved to the US in 2010 through a green card and now a nurse in Dallas, shares his experience abroad.
When I landed here, if I had a ticket back home, I could have come back home.
Through his eyes, find out, is obtaining the US green card a guarantee for a better life? Also on the show, Joyce Nduku, a daring 67-year-old marathon granny, is now all set for the forthcoming Boston Marathon.
My first world marathon major was the Chicago Marathon, which I ran in the year 2008.
For all your personal and business insurance needs, SMS PROTECT to 22801. UAP Old Mutual. We've got you covered. Doing great things every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic has occasioned unprecedented need for labor agility and skills dynamism as persons pursue adaptability to the new norm precipitated in the working environment. The pandemic has created both challenges and opportunities in the labor market as some jobs are phased out and others emerge, bringing about the need for multi-skilling if one is to be competitive in the evolving workplace. On the 15th of July, the International Labour Organization will lead the globe in observing the World Skills Day, with the day themed Reimagining Youth Skills Post-Pandemic. How can the youth be better equipped for adaptability in a rapidly evolving labour market? How can both public and private sector players better create an environment for decent and sustainable work? NTV will host a virtual Nation Leadership Forum on World Youth Skills Day, placing the spotlight on these pertinent issues.
Lifestyle Heights, a prestigious gated community in a tranquil environment offering elegantly styled 2 or 3 and a 3-bedroom plus a DSQ apartment, combining tasteful design and modern amenities. Contact us on 0706 155 277 or 0726 205 208.
Thank you for staying with your World on NTV this morning. We are talking about data protection in Kenya. My guests Mugambi Laibuta, April Oichoy and Faustin Gila are still with me. But before we resume the discussion, let me just give you a feel-good story from across the world. An injured baby elephant left behind by a migrating wild herd in southwest China has been rescued, the latest in a twist of chaotic odyssey. The herd of Asian elephants has spent months roaming across Yunnan province, traveling more than 500 kilometers, that is 310 miles, from their home nature reserve in one of the longest ever animal migration of its kind in China. Firefighters rescued the trapped survivors after the deadly Chinese... I will, of course, get you that story first.
你还不配合的呀？是哪里的？后面带两个。赶紧消那药，因为他的伤口看上去还是很严重的，相信。
And elsewhere, 8 people have been confirmed dead and 9 more remain missing after a budget hotel collapsed in the eastern Chinese city of Suzhou. 6 others were rescued from the rubble in the CG Yuan Hotel, which collapsed on Monday afternoon. The government of the district of Wujiang said in an official social media feed. Authorities had earlier suggested that 14 people had already been rescued, but offered a new tally following further analysis and screening of new information. No cause for the disaster has yet been given by the government authorities. The hotel opened in 2018 and had 54 guest rooms, according to its listing on the Travel Science Ctrip. Now, let's get you, of course, moving with that conversation on data protection in Kenya. And before we went to the break, we were talking about the issue of how, of course, how businesses use our personal data for their personal gain. Let me just bring in Faustin, because Faustin, you are a journalist. You focus very closely on issues of fourth industrial revolution and how, of course, technology is going to influence the future. And if you look at what has been happening now, with, of course, the whole issue of COVID-19. Most businesses have been going online. They are trying to take their businesses online, and that means, of course, interacting with users' personal data, which they will need, of course, to perhaps analyze, to see trends and make sure that they grow their business. So how does privacy come in between?
Yeah, Victor, when you look at the fourth industrial revolution, where we are talking about 13 frontier technologies, you find that data is at the center of the fourth industrial revolution. In fact, data is the new oil. You have said this repeated many times. And I think if we don't act proactively, as Mugambi has talked about GDPR, if we don't have a stronger law, then we'll be taken advantage of by the rest of the world. Because when you look at most of the consumables that we have are from other markets. It's either from the East or from the West. The smartphones that we own, everything that we are using to plug into the fourth industrial revolution is owned by other nations. We don't own any of these laptops, smartphones, even the technologies themselves. Now we are talking of 5G that we have. We don't own it. It's owned by Huawei. You see? So that is a big loophole where our data can be used by other countries. Then they use this data, analyze it, and create solutions to us, and then bring the products here in Kenya, sell them to us, and you see the taxes are being left in their home countries.
Okay, and maybe if I can ask you then, so how do we find the balance in this? Because really, I mean, I need that mobile banking app. I need the efficiency that comes with transacting in the middle of the night. But also, I don't want them using or misusing my data.
Yeah, so we have to rethink how we are governing our data first. Because as it is constituted, the DPA that we have at the moment is not strong enough to protect us, to protect even companies. Even the government itself, how many times has it been had? You see, so we need to rethink how this law is constituted and even the penalties, because we have talked about this so many times. 5 million is so little for so many listed companies.
Okay, and maybe because then he has touched on this, let me just go back to the issue of Huduma Number Mugambi, because this is the same government that should be enforcing and ensuring that my data is protected. But if you look at, if you look at how Kenyans were being onboarded on the issue of Huduma Number, what first comes to your mind when you think about that entire process?
First, when Huduma Number was first mooted, we did not have any regulations relating to what Huduma Number is all about. These regulations under the Registration of Persons Act came after the fact All right? Yeah. Of course, there's that amendment, I think it was Section 9A. I can't remember the section on the Registration of Persons Act was there saying that there'll be this digital registration. But there are no regulations to define what this digital registration was all about. What kind of information, data points were they seeking, and for what purpose? And it is for that reason the petitioners in the Huduma number case raised several issues. One, they raised the issue that you're implementing a digital ID system without having a comprehensive data protection law. Secondly, there's no data minimization here because you're asking for biometric data, you're asking for BDNA, you're asking for GPS. And even the court said you collect all the other data apart from this.
Yeah.
Further, I think the Nubian Human Rights, there's an organization called, I think, the Nubian Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
It was saying that this digital ID that you're doing is not dealing with the past historical injustices that certain communities have faced in their right to identity. Because under our constitution, we have a right to identity. Whether either you were born in Kenya or you've been resident to a certain amount of time, there's some constitutional right there. And they were saying, no, you know, for us, we've not even benefited from the old kind of digital ID system. So we need, they said we need to rethink that before we can go to a digital ID, because some of the issues that the government was saying that if you do not register for Huduma number, they'll say, for example, you will not get essential services, you'll not get to hospital, you'll not get education services, etc. So they gave a very strong conditions. I mean, it was threats. Actually, simply put,
it was threats.
It was threats. And even the court said, no, really. While you're implementing this, implement it in such a way that you can capture people who want to opt in at the moment. But the court said you cannot deny people essential services just because of this.
Okay.
And other countries, for example, Jamaica had a similar petition. Jamaica struck out the whole digital ID thing, the whole of it. India, the court said, yes, you need to comply with certain principles. It gave the government a go-ahead. The Supreme Court gave a go-ahead, but gave certain standards that must be met while implementing that. April mentioned it. That system has already been hacked.
And all the data is on the dark web.
Which system?
The Indian Aadhaar system, the Huduma number equivalent for India, was hacked, and 1 billion records of Indian citizens were sold onto the dark web. And all that information is there. So my concern, just to pick up from where Mugambi, had you finished? Sorry.
Yes, sure.
Just to pick up from where he has left, my concern is, as much as we are on the cyberspace, and I think I've mentioned this before, having a digital identity is crucial, because you have to be identified for you to be able to access services. And he has touched on all these people who are already out there, who are not registered, have no kind of registration whatsoever. So how do you go back? So my question is, what exactly was the objective, or is the objective of this Huduma number? So I personally asked, will it replace the national ID? The answer was no. But
that's what was sold. It was sold that.
No. But I mean, we still need. I mean, even with that, you still need a digital driving license. You still need an NHIS.
You need an
NSSF.
You need a passport. So the question is, what was it for?
Forgive my ignorance, guys, but what I was told that once I have this card, it has everything. I can literally walk to NHIF and NSSF and KRA and whatnot, and they will have everything I need.
I think you probably should have invited those people who said that for them to tell us, because you see, for us it's speculation. But the question is, the Huduma number is here, then we have all this. Then another aspect that I would like to mention, there are a lot of errors in those, in some of those cards. The Data Protection Act, for example, provides the data subject or an individual, you and I, the right to correct data.
Yes.
The correction process is becoming an issue. And another problem that people had with this Huduma number is that the cyber security, the aspect in government is quite weak. Let me give you an example. I think I'm being polite, as you say. When you go to, let's say, the KRA website, then you go to the Teams website, then you go to Nairobi County.
That's for NTSA, right?
Yeah, or NTSA, or you go to Nairobi, whatever county. If you go to even the judiciary portal, they all have different standards.
Sure.
There is no uniform standard that government uses for their cyber security aspects. The Ministry of ICT will say that they have a cyber security policy, but the fact that all these platforms have very different standards, have very different functionality, different usability. It raises the question then, how safe is our information
That
on
means
these platforms?
this entity is, whether it's KRA or who, are not just exposing themselves, they are also exposing me because they have my data.
You remember when certain websites of government agencies had been hacked?
Yes.
I mean, it's recent. I think it was just one. It was last year. I mean, they were hacked. We have this phenomenon called ransomware. Let's say, for example, an important portal of government was attacked by ransomware. It's happened. The National Hospital Services in the UK had this attack. NHS had this attack. What now if we got the similar attack? What does it mean? Because, as April said, data protection goes hand in hand with cyber security, with security. Because one of the principles of data protection is that you must ensure that the data is kept securely. But our analysis on audit of just simple, like she did the one for banks, I did at some point, I just went to looking at websites of different government institutions, and I realized they are very different. Some have weaker standards, some are a bit stronger, but not as strong as they should be. So these are issues that by now should have been sorted out.
Just to add on to what you're saying, I know for a fact that ICT Authority actually created standards on cybersecurity and all that stuff. Now, my question is, maybe the enforcement is what needs to happen. Because even Central Bank, for example, also created guidelines on how banks should actually implement cybersecurity. They are required to be audited, etc., etc. I can tell you up to now, I don't know how many banks in Kenya are actually PCI DSS certified, which is a standard that is for the banking industry to protect payment card data. And I can tell you quite a number of them are not. Probably just the big banks are actually PCI DSS certified. Now, when we talk about, because Faustin touched on it and Mugambi has touched on it, the Data Privacy Act requires that organizations put in place organizational and technical mechanisms to protect the data. Now, we were on the Huduma number issue, and I was talking about my personal concern was a digital identity is excellent for creating opportunities, if for sure that is what the government intends to do. But I need confidence in the government that, you know what, this information that I'm giving you, you actually have the infrastructure in place and the will in place to actually implement those security and technical mechanisms to protect my data. My other concern was that all this information is going to sit in a centralized database. Then just as I'm thinking about that, the Indian Aadhaar system is hacked. Same thing, centralized database, 1 billion records on the dark web. Now you tell me, how comfortable would I be? Because considering already the government is sharing a lot of personal information with some of the big telcos in this country. We know that for a fact. So, and we know that there's a lot of tracking and there's a lot of all this stuff going on web applications and mobile applications. You tell me, all these things are on the cyberspace. How comfortable will I be to actually give my information? So it's up to, I think it's up to the government to actually come to a place where they make the citizenry comfortable. You know, once you make me comfortable, then I will have no objection. If you tell me that, you know what, we have put certain mechanisms in place to protect your information. And that's what the petitioners who went to court were looking for. They were like, okay, fine, we are putting the cart before the horse. So can you tell us what mechanisms you have put in place to protect all these citizens' information? And that's where the government needs to come out strongly now and tell us that, you know, we have put this particular security and technical mechanisms in place to protect your data. There is no risk-free environment in this world, that's for sure. There is no 0% risk. There's always a certain element of risk. But the whole idea about risk management and cybersecurity is to mitigate risk as far as is possible. And that is basically that is the comfort that the government needs to give the citizenry. That in all this process, we are actually taking security and technical issues very, very seriously.
Actually, I'd like to mention something from what April said. Another issue was, who is going to check the government? She's mentioned who is going to check how the government is using the data. So what the Ministry of ICT did, they came up with regulations under the Data Protection Act called the Civil Registration Data Protection Regulations. guess the office that is supposed to carry oversight with that, Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, to check whether, for example, registration of persons, whether it's for registering refugees, whether you're registering Kenyans, whether you're getting people their passports, whether it's birth certificates, etc. All registration systems, their data protection systems ought to be audited by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, which we've been saying, under the Act as structured, is not an independent one, and looking at the budgetary estimates, has not been afforded the correct amount of resources to carry out such audits. And these were the questions the petitioners in the Huduma number case were raising. Some of those issues have not been tackled up to today.
Okay. And we have to wrap up this conversation, but before we do, two issues. Number one, of course, greetings from Shadrach. He says he's your former student, his former lecturer. And the question he has was, how do you differentiate between private and personal data? And he says the Act might have mischaracterized it. Is there a difference between any of those? Private and personal data?
You see, the Act talks about personal data. It doesn't talk about private. The word it uses is personal data, and this is the word used in many statutes across the world. And some statutes have unpackaged that and listed what amounts to personal data. But ideally, it's any data or any information of an identified person or that could be used to identify an individual.
A living.
So if my name is Victor Kiprop and my ID is 123457,
that is an identified.
That is personal.
It's personal data, and we can identify you directly.
Yes.
And what's private about it?
You see, the thing is, the Data Protection Act implements Article 31C and D. Article 31C and D is about your private affairs not being disclosed and your communication being disclosed. And that, in my view, that was also an error. The whole Data Protection Act should have been to implement Article 31 in total, even to deal with issues of searches, etc. But that's not the case. So, but on the issue of personal data, the Act it talks of personal data and says personal data.
It also talks about the data privacy impact assessment.
Yes, I'll get there. So that's what. So any data point that can identify or can identify somebody directly, or can be collected, analyzed, and identify a person is personal data. And this personal data is subject to certain basic data protection principles under the Data Protection Act. The data subject, who is quote-unquote the owner of this data under Section 26, has certain rights, like rights to be informed to what this data, what is it going to be used for. They have a right to access their data. They have a right to object. They have a right to correction of their data. In inclusion of that, the data controllers and the data processor, who are these institutions we have been talking about that want to use this personal data, have certain obligations. You have an obligation to inform, that is to be transparent about your using. You have to use this legitimately. There has to be a legitimate reason why you are using this personal data. You should have data minimization. Only collect data that you need. There's the issue of purpose. You cannot use data for the purpose that it was not collected for. There's the issue of security of this data. You must ensure that this data is secure. And you must be accountable. You must be accountable to the data subject. You must be accountable to the regulators. And those are the gaps that Faustin, April, and I have been mentioning. There are these gaps.
Okay, good people, we're running out of time and I have to get your closing remarks, gentlemen and ladies. And I'll start with you, Faustin. You're a big fan of people taking personal responsibility and starting to protect themselves. But I'm just, what you'd call a common mananchi. I'm trying to look for food. I'm trying to look for unga and find a job. Why should data and the privacy and the protection of my data really matter to me? And maybe how can I go about perhaps doing those basic things to protect myself?
Okay. First, before protecting yourself, there is a loophole that we are seeing in terms of cybersecurity on the Huduma data that we have on the national level. And I think the government, the Ministry of ICT has been presented the blockchain report and artificial intelligence. And I think they should now embark on implementing a nationwide public blockchain for Huduma data. She talked about centralization of data, but to make this data more secure, it needs to be decentralized. And this is where blockchain comes in very well, where you find that if anyone attempts to alter any details about you or tries to transfer your details, then you are able to know and you can approve or reject. You see, that is number one on the national level.
Okay.
Then on the personal level, it starts from the phone that you have, whether it's the Symbian or the feature phone or the smartphone. Third parties or other third-party apps are the highest leakage point where most of your data is siphoned without your consent. So you should start by going to your settings and then disable the access of your personal information by third parties. I know everybody has over 10 apps that freely get their information without their consent.
Yeah.
So that is where most people should start, because if you block that area, then the other way to take your data would be through the traditional format. Then there is also the fear of when you lose your phone and some people get access to that phone, they could access your private data. So it's always good to back up your data, and with this, I would recommend the use of the cloud platforms that we have. Everybody has a Google account. You can back up all your contacts, all your messages, all your documents, everything, without the fear of loss if you misplace or
Thank you, Faustin.
your phone is stolen.
Okay.
Yeah, so you should also put anti-malware protection on. That's another thing. And also, there are these numbers that call from Colombia or Ukraine, but you never know. So you need to also block them so that they don't have access to you again. Then you also need to keep updating your security essentials for your smartphone and all the devices that you are using to share data.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you, Faustin. And I'll give each one of you 50 seconds to give us your closing remarks. Let me start with you, April.
Okay, Faustin has given the technical, the things that you can do to protect yourself on the cyberspace. This is very important because research that was done last year actually ranked Kenyans the most careless on the internet. And this is true. If you look at how people expose their information on Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff, people actually give a lot of information. And all this information that is made public, I like empowering the public, so let me empower the public. All this information that you freely give about yourself is not covered under the Data Protection Act. It is considered publicly available information. So if you give it, you are not covered. If you give it willingly and you display it all over for people to see, then you are not covered. The other thing that I would say is, I think organizations need to take personal data very seriously, because this is actually what drives your business. And because it drives your business, then let's just be fair in how we are handling people's information. And I'll let Mugambi talk about the government aspect of it, but I like what Faustin has also said about the issue of blockchain. I'll give an example of Rwanda. I admired the Rwanda procurement process. It is totally government procurement process. It is totally digitized. So I got onto the platform to actually register my company, and they told me, if we do not have you registered within 10 minutes, call us back. And within 10 minutes, I had a digital certificate, which identifies, basically is tied to every single document that we present on that platform. And I think Kenya has the capacity to go that way. And we can use blockchain for immutability because it offers that protection of, people cannot actually do something and then claim that they didn't do it. So I like what he said.
All right, Mugambi.
Starting from the individual point of view, Kenya should know Article 31 provides for your right to privacy. The Data Protection Act 2019 implements that, it operationalizes the right to privacy in relation to personal data. Certain things need to happen for us to have a good functioning data protection. Like we've mentioned, we need to remove the office, the ICT Cabinet Secretary from the Data Protection Act. Let's have a fully statutorily independent office of the Data Protection Commissioner and provide that office with proper funding. Also, with funding, that office will be able to carry out public education to the masses, not only online like they've been doing. They've been doing it online, yes, but it also needs to go to people who do not, because majority of Kenyans may not have access to this. Also, the debates and the discussions on the draft data protection regulations also need to go machinani, not just on Zoom platforms. Then also, institutions that are seeing because institutions may be asking, how do we comply with this act? One, there needs to be training. They need to understand what this act and how it affects the operation. Secondly, they need to think about coming up with the institutional data protection policies, data protection notices, and appointing data protection officers. And this way, there'll be a journey towards full implementation of the act.
All right. Thank you very much. That's where we wrap it this morning. Of course, we have been talking about data protection in Kenya. Many thanks to my guest in studio this morning, Mugambi Laibuta. He's a privacy and data protection specialist. Many thanks as well to April Oichoi. She's the CEO of Infosphere, as well as my colleague, of course, Faustin Gila, who is a fourth industrial revolution journalist here at The Nation Media Group. From me and the entire team, it's goodbye for now. But remember, tomorrow, of course, we will be back here with yet another exciting conversation, and we will be talking about celebrations. That is, of course, weddings, baby showers, bridal showers, graduation parties. Are we spending too much money with them? Are they too extravagant? So are we celebrating life or overdoing celebrations? All this and more tomorrow between 7 and 9 a.m. I've been your host, Victor Kiprop. See you again tomorrow.